Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Rockhold, and I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education. We're so pleased you're here with us tonight. I suspect a lot of us had a late night last night, and so it's really wonderful to see such a full room and that you're here with us to commemorate Kristallnacht. This is one of 4 annual commemorations that MCHE hosts, and tonight our focus is on the experience of our German, Austrian, and Sudeten Jewish survivors. So this is an event that really represents a turning point in their experience of the Holocaust. For years they had experienced persecution, but this is a moment where things felt fundamentally different for them. And they realized that they were no longer safe where they were, and that this was a moment where they had to execute a change. It was a moment to get out. For years we have called this program our Kristallnacht program. That's the word that you're probably all most familiar with. It's a word that comes from slang from Berlin on that night. It refers to the broken glass on the ground. As a professional field, we've been moving away from that, and we've been calling it the November pogrom, which brings us more into line with how Europeans speak about this event. And it reintroduces the human experience of the event. Instead of it being about the physical structures of the synagogues or the broken glass on the ground, it reintroduces the individual violence that was experienced by the people in those communities on that night. And so that's one of our goals with this program. It's a deeply personal program, and we hope to bring that humanity and that experience to you tonight. So it is my pleasure to introduce MCHE's historian, Dr. Shelley Klein, to set a little bit of context for that history, and then we'll be speaking about the dance performance and how that was envisioned.
Thank you, Jessica. And again, thank you all for being here tonight. On November 9th, 1938, the Nazi government incited an attack on the Jewish population of Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland, so all the areas that they were currently in control of at the time. The pretext was the assassination of a minor German diplomat in Paris by a Jewish man. And this was the excuse that Goebbels needed, that he had been looking and waiting for to set off this spectacle of attack. And that night, synagogues and homes were set on fire, giving us some of the most iconic photos of this event. Businesses were ransacked and looted, but homes were also invaded. And although they exist, they're much less well known. You can find photographs of individuals woken up in the middle of the night, still wearing their pajamas, bloodied and beaten. And these photos, again, remind us of that human impact. The official death toll was 91, but it could very well be much higher. There are not recorded numbers of those beaten or the number of women who were assaulted. That night, Jewish men were arrested and the next day sent to concentration camps. This was the first time that Jewish men were arrested and sent to camps solely for being Jewish. So again, we have a turning point. In the aftermath of this attack, the government put a tax on the Jewish community to actually pay for the millions of Reichsmarks of damage done. And in the weeks following, there were increasing anti-Jewish legislation measures that were passed that further restricted the ability for the Jewish population to engage in public life and also to earn a living. So many accelerated their efforts to emigrate. Some who left came to the Kansas City community, and the performance that you're about to see is based on their experiences. We encourage you to look at the programs that you picked up, to visit our website and learn more about some of their stories. Following tonight's performance, we'll be joined by Suzanne and John to hear a little bit more about that creative process. And right now, I'd like to welcome our choreographer, Suzanne Rostrati, to introduce the piece and to tell a little bit about the gestures that will be used. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here with you tonight. This is Nora Burkett Davis, and that's Mr. John Curry. She's going to demonstrate some movements that we did with our hands that are incorporated into the piece so that you'll have a chance to understand where they came from. The first meeting we had as a cast was at my house, and we watched the film that the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education produced on Kristallnacht, and it shared a lot of insight historically and also about people who were witnesses. And following that, we went outside and stood in my driveway, and I asked each person to think about some things that were resonating with them, and there's a lot. But I asked them to pick one to share it with the group and also come up with a hand gesture or simple movement that would go with different elements of the story. So some of the gestures or movements that are with the arms represented different things. So one of them was a flame. So you'll see that, that had to do with the buildings that were burned. There was another one where a person was asked to hand over their jewelry. Mm-hmm. And then the one like this, cats. Mm-hmm. And then there's this flippy hand one, and that has to do with how at one moment someone is a German citizen who is Jewish, and the other moment they're no longer a German citizen at that point. Yeah, this movement right here is about feeling, I'll say icky or out of control. It's kind of hard to find an English word to describe all the things that were discussed. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I think there's one more. Oh, yeah, and separating. So people had to change names. Some people changed names, and they were also separating. There's some different things about separating in the stories that we were watching. All right, thank you so much. So when you see those, you'll know that where some of those came from. All right.
And I realize how absolutely essential memories are. You know, we are who we are because of what we learn and what we remember. It's essential to identity. It is our identity.
We lived in a small city of about 20,000 people.
I had a close family life.
I had a wonderful childhood. I had 13 dolls. I had roller skates.
My dad quit school at the age of 14. He lost his father early, and he took over the business to support his mother and his 3 sisters. He did a good job. He was successful in his business, cattle business, dairy cows, Holstein cows.
My mother's youngest brother lived in Berlin and had a shoe factory.
Berlin was sort of the mecca of artists, writers, musicians.
My father certainly thought of himself as being a German, just like all the other people around him.
Strangely enough, there was also a church right next to the cow stable, which is an indication that the Jew in Germany was well integrated, was well accepted. The Jew remained a Jew, but as far as we were concerned, we were observant Jews, Orthodox, but to us, Judaism was just a religion. We were Germans, Germans all the way through.
For many, many years, I was not aware that I was different.
There were constant reports on the radio, and we knew something was going to happen.
I came out of school to go home for lunch when a swastika flag was hanging from the building across the street from the school, a sign that that's the way it's going to be. So I went home, and my mother had one of my favorite dishes boiling on the stove, and we just let it boil.
It became so
bad
we couldn't
dairy
go
cows, Holstein
into
cows.
theaters,
For many, many years,
participate in any.
I was not aware that I was different.
And we just let it boil.
And the next thing I remember very vividly is the stormtroopers marching down the narrow street that was at the side of our apartment building. Nazi march, the sound of the boots on the ground can put the fear.
We lived in a small city of about 20,000 people. We had a grain business and a flour mill, and everybody knew everybody in a little town for generations. There was no difference between us and them. I had my grain business till 1938, but it was very hard because they came with new laws every other month. They had new laws, you can deal in this and you can deal in this, and then they got after the farmers and told them, you better break up your business with the Jew. That's what they said. And they got scared. And they said, Bernard, we know you, we knew your father, and we just can't do it because we are in danger if we continue to make business with you. The Kristallnacht. They busted the apartments and the houses where Jewish people lived and threw the stuff out on the street. Aunt of mine, they dumped the refrigerators and everything from the third floor down to the street. They had knives in their hand and cut every picture on the wall to pieces. They acted like animals and not like human beings. The SS came in the morning by 5 o'clock, knocked at the doors, and took me and my nephew to the jail. We didn't know what's going on and why they did it. We all boarded buses and went to little towns in the area where they picked up more Jewish people, and then they took us to the concentration camp Sachsenhausen, close to Berlin. I stayed in the concentration camp 2 months, and I got out only because my mother and my folks in my hometown could prove that we will leave Germany in 1 or 2 months. They bought tickets to Shanghai. This was the only place in the world where you could go without any visa. All you needed was a passport with a J in it.
The German youth used to march through the city and mark the doors of Jewish merchants, break the windows, steal the merchandise, and pick on the Jewish children. My father was beaten up quite a few times. And there were, I'd say, 6 incidents before my father finally decided to leave Germany.
March 1938, Hitler took over Austria. Things changed very rapidly. The first thing that happened that particular summer was the Nazis gave my parents an ultimatum. You had to vacate our apartment. The Nazis wanted to have it as their headquarters. When school started that fall, I could not go back to my school. What was established were ghetto schools for Jewish children. My brother and I went to a ghetto school. You know, if somebody made a mistake, well, what could you expect? And so, self-esteem went way down. The next turning point in our life was Kristallnacht. My brother and I went off to school. My older brother was living at home. He was not working anymore. A very strange thing began to happen during the day. One after another child was called up to the front. The teacher said something to them, and they left. And fewer and fewer kids were in the class. It was kind of bothersome because you didn't know what was happening, and I was still there. When school was out, I walked home with my brother, and my mother was beside herself. My older brother had gone out in the morning to mail a letter and had never come back. We knew nothing. We didn't hear anything. My mother was frantic. My dad wasn't there. My father had gallstones. There was a very famous cure in his old hometown in a Catholic hospital. Late afternoon, there was a knock on the door. My mother opened up the door, and there stood 3 burly guys, Nazi in SS uniform. They said, "Where's Mr. Eisner?" And my mother said, "He's not here." "What do you mean he isn't here?" "Well, he's in the hospital in Gotz." They marched in. They said, "Where's your jewelry? Where's your money?" She handed over everything. They took my father's shortwave radio. And then my mother asked, very innocently, "Now, when am I going to get all this back?" And they said, "Lady, you should be glad we didn't throw your children out the window." My mother didn't know what to do at that point. She called the man who worked most closely with my father. He was the bookkeeper. He came over right away. It was amazing. I mean, considering the circumstances, he literally took his life in his hand. He was not Jewish. He came over and brought money and asked my mother what else he could do for us. We were concerned about my older brother and wondered what was happening to him. I can't really remember when my dad came back. It must have been a few days later. The stay in the Catholic hospital saved his life because he did not get picked up and put in a concentration camp. Someone called us and told us that my brother was in one of these detention places, which is what the Nazis had planned in school gymnasiums and public places, where people were packed in 200 to a small room with no facilities whatsoever. He was there, he was alive. My parents were called up to the Gestapo headquarters. They said to my parents, "You have until April 15th to get out of this country." And so parents came home and said, we're not sure we're going to make this. You and Pete, my younger brother, are going to go on a children's transport to England.
Somebody had the bright idea of having all the kids in the train sing a certain Austrian folk song, muss sie denn zum Städtle hinaus, which means, must I leave my little town?
I was born in Germany. We lived in the family home that my father bought from his mother. I went to a Catholic school run by the Ursulines, the nuns. There were about 4 Jewish children in the school. The nuns were very nice to us. And when the Catholic children had religious instruction, the Jewish and the Protestant or Lutheran children would go into a separate room and do their homework. I was the valedictorian of my class. The treatment was absolutely equal and fair. We had many good friends and felt just really at home. I wanted to become a dress designer. So you see, we were fully accepted. We never felt that we were different from the other children, until all of a sudden it just all turned. People became afraid. They became afraid to talk to us, afraid to associate with us. That became then very hard, especially growing up and thinking they were all your friends. There was a neighborhood boy with whom I had grown up, standing in front of our door in uniform, as if he didn't know me. And that was the first time I really realized what was going on. the changes, I mean, the terrible things that the population of these small towns did to the people. Jews couldn't have a telephone. They could not have a telephone anymore. The Jewish butcher, his store was closed. He couldn't work anymore. The Christian butchers wouldn't sell meat to Jews. The barbers wouldn't cut the hair of the Jews. It was a situation that was, can't describe it, that it's so inhuman. On the 9th of November, there were constant reports on the radio. We knew something was going to happen. That night, we went to bed like every other night, normal time. And during the night, all of a sudden, we hear an awful lot of noise in front of our house. My parents were on the second floor. My father opened the window and he said, "What's going on down there?" And there were a lot of people in uniform, an awful lot of people. Somebody yelled, "Are you a Jew?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, in 10 minutes, we will burn your house down." What do you do if somebody says that? I grabbed my passport, my purse. I threw some things in the suitcase. My mother took her purse and took some valuables. You get so confused, you don't even know what you're taking at a moment like that. On this Kristallnacht, when I went to the railroad station, I was under the impression that what was going on in Geilenkirchen was just happening there because the people in the small towns were very much more anti-Semitic than the people in the big cities, because the people in small towns, they were watching each other, and one tried to outdo the other. So I thought that this was just an idea of the people in Geilenkirchen. I did not know that it was nationwide, or had no idea what was happening. So I got on the train, and I was just shaking. It was an awful situation. My father and my mother and almost my entire family did not get out of Germany because they couldn't see what was coming. They just couldn't see themselves living anywhere else because they had lived there all their life. And by the time they realized what was going on, it was too late and they couldn't get out.
The Hitlerjugend began their horrible persecutions and terrible things just overnight. It came where they stopped Jewish men with beards and either cut the beards off, or in some instances they took a match and burned the beard, and no one came to the rescue. People were just standing, watching, but nobody would come and help or stop these youngsters.
I came out of school to go home for lunch when a swastika flag was hanging from the building across the street from the school, a sign that that's the way it's going to be. So I went home, and my mother had one of my favorite dishes boiling on the stove, and we just let it boil and took a briefcase. We were afraid to take a suitcase. We walked to the railroad depot and take the next train to Pilsen.
I couldn't go and play in my beloved park, which was just 15, 20 minutes away from my house, because there was a big sign on the entrance posted, "Dogs and Jews are not permitted." Overnight, this all happened overnight. They had signs painted on the bench, "Not for Jews."
I was born and raised in Berlin. My father was totally blind, a most remarkable man. And I remember, of course, going with him, and it wasn't that I was leading him, he was leading me. My father studied music. We had many times concerts at home where for an evening where guests were invited and different artists. I went to Jewish school. I remember when really the bad times started in 1938. Bad times started in 1938 when there was the Kristallnacht. Synagogues were burned, Jewish stores were robbed and windows broke. We lived in an apartment and they had painted a big Star of David on our door. I remember my father had to go and turn in all electrical appliances. You weren't allowed to have a radio, an iron. You weren't allowed to have animals. I remember we had a bird and we had to get rid of the bird, and a dog, weren't allowed to have anything. Star of David, which we had to wear on our clothes, on the left side of the chest, and it had to be sewn tightly all around. And therefore, of course, we were marked that we were Jewish. There were many, many times when we came out of school and the Hitler youth groups were outside throwing stones, beating us up, taking us to houses with cellars and kept us in cellars. There was a law that all Jewish institutions and schools had to be dissolved. And we were not allowed to go to school anymore. My parents or anybody else was also not allowed to tutor us or give any private lessons. I remember the last day when we received our last paper, report card and paper, that where on the bottom it says she's leaving school because of the orders of dissolving the Jewish school system. I have a little booklet, I guess you call it an autograph booklet, with poems which my classmates signed in. And as far as I know, that none of them survived, nor did my teachers.
I was practicing law in my hometown. I was pleading a case one morning, and all of a sudden we heard hard heels on the stone floor of the courthouse. The judge, who was a wise man, knew what was happening. He knew the Nazis were coming. He pulled me by the arm behind the bar and pushed me into his chamber. At that moment, the stormtroopers came in, Juden raus, out with the Jews. I disappeared through a back door. That was the end of the career that I had planned and worshipped all my young years.
My father was a doctor in Berlin. The apartment complex was 14 rooms, which of course included the clinics. In Germany, a lot of the doctors had their offices and their living quarters in the same place. Kristallnacht. In our apartment, my dad shut off all the lights and telling all of us to lay on the floor and not to move, not to get up. And even though the noise around us was horrendous, people shouting and see like flames, torches, that type of thing. And this went on for hours, it might have really been a shorter time. It felt like it was from 11 at night till 6 the next morning. I think this is when I really became aware of anti-Semitism. After the Kristallnacht, we no longer could go to a public school. I used to play soccer, and I would have non-Jewish friends, and then, of course, we had to go to a Jewish school. It took an adjustment to be in a school that was only for kids who wore the star, which, of course, was the law. My father was able to medically help a very high police official. Those police officials could not go to Jewish doctors. Apparently, he gave my dad a few days' notice and said, "Hugo, there's a list up here of people for us to pick up. Your family is on that list. I can postpone things by 48 hours, 72 hours. It was in the middle of the night. My dad woke us up, said, "Here's your suitcase and let's go." We left so abruptly. In other words, there was really nothing of saying goodbye to anybody. It was probably something like 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. We went to the train station and went on a train to Poland. From Poland, we went into Russia, and from Moscow, we took the Siberian Express, which takes 7 days to Manchuria. Then you go to North Korea. This is all by train. Then from Byron, you take a ship down to Shanghai. In every place that we stopped, there was a person from the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society that would help us all they could in terms of keeping us moving.
And I realize how absolutely essential memories are. You know, we are who we are because of what we learn and what we remember. It's essential to identity. It is our identity.
First of all, this is not the first time you've collaborated with MCHE. We're very grateful to have your talents working with us. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the process of translating history and testimony into this artistic production.
Dr. Shelley and I met almost a year ago to talk about the possibility of working together. The first project I did was with the Hess family, who's also here today. Thank you so much. That was an honor to work with you, to share the story of your mother and grandmother. When we met, I asked Shelley, what can I do to help you? and your organization. Is there something I can do for you as a choreographer and artist to support you? And so we talked about a few different options, and after that, she gave me a lot of research and a lot of videos and books and articles and presentations that I could dive into. And then after that, I talked to Mr. John Curry. He and I had worked together on another production that told the stories of people living with Parkinson's disease. And so I invited him to be a part of this project as well. And we shared a lot of history and research findings. His music actually has a lot of historical things that are included. When we had talked originally, I would go and ask her questions a lot. How would you like this to be done? Do you have a preference about this? And one of the things was the costuming. So we looked at a lot of historical costuming, and one of the things that was very relevant or made real was the materials would have been really hot to wear on stage, and to show a variety of areas and economic status meant that some of the fashion, you couldn't do a whole lot of movement. And so what we did was we tried to infuse some of those decisions into the costuming. So one of the stories talks about having music in the home, and musicians would come in the home. And so one of the instruments was we did a pleat based on the accordion. And so it's all an accordion pleat when you're doing when you're sewing or doing design. And so that was the pleat I used on Andrea's dress as she told that story. And there were lots of things about costumes that were infused with history, even though it might just seem like a dress. But one of the stories has all of these travels all the way to Shanghai, and so there's all of this drawing on the sleeves to denote things like that. And so with the movement, after we met in at my house, John and I met and chatted frequently throughout the process. So it's common with dance choreography to have music that you create movements to, but the cast and I worked together to create movement that you saw today, along with some improvisation by Maggie Nichols. And so it was an amazing community contribution, which was very important for this project. Would you like to share anything about want to share some of the...
Yeah, sure. First of all,
except for, can you say that you made the music after I did the movement?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, just continuing the point that Suzanne was alluding to, is they created the movement, and of course, the music already existed in a way, because the music was the dialogue, the story, the people's stories. So that already existed. So between the dialogue, the stories, and the movement, those two elements were already in place. So my approach was a bit different in that those already existed, and I'm an accompanist in this role, and so really tried to tap into the feeling, the mood of different points of the story. You probably noticed a clock ticking in many of the stories, and that was just symbolism for the impending doom of what was going on in the experience there, and how there was just a situation that unimaginable that was coming at you, no matter whether you could, no matter what you tried to do, you couldn't stop it. And then just a little insight into the beginning and end. I sit there and thought, well, this is such a horrible experience and point in history of Germany. How can I juxtapose that to something or reference something? I spent a little time thinking about what was something beautiful that Germany gave to the world, and I landed on Bach, of course, J.S. Bach, being an amazing composer. So many composers have done this, not an original idea, but the opening notes that you hear and the notes that return at the end are actually spelling Bach's name in the musical alphabet. His name is B-A-C-H, and the way that's translated or interpreted in the musical notes is B flat, A, C, and then B natural is the way that works. So that's where I got that from, so that I wanted to try to juxtapose this unimaginable, incomprehensible situation to something beautiful, and how they don't mesh in a way. So I wanted to juxtapose those in my music, and then everything else, it was like trying to support the story and the movement and everything that the people were expressing in their stories, and keeping mindful with my instrument choice, keeping mindful that most of these people were kids at the time, and so I brought an instrument into the piece that was very childlike, that immediately has a childlike character and nature to it, and then took the approach of changing the mood of the way the instrument expressed itself when the stories changed and when things started to happen. So that's a little insight into my approach, and really appreciate being part of the project. It's been a real blessing to be able to share these people's stories, and hopefully the music has done it justice in honoring them.
Thank you so much for that. It was a really interesting insights into how this comes together. I think I'd like to hear a little bit about what motivates you both to do this work, to work on this piece. I mean, you put in both so many hours, so much effort and thought, and even just these small details that you just shared with us right now. I'm sure there's 100 more that we don't know, right? So what motivates you to put your creative energy into this project?
Since I was probably in middle school, I started speaking and standing up for human rights, for groups of people or individuals, including myself, who were facing some sort of judgment or backlash or rights being taken away, even everyday basic rights like housing. And it's very disturbing to me that a group of people would be targeted and for being who they are, and I've felt very strongly against anti-Semitism. And so that's what kind of got me pulled. I felt pulled to try to do something to make a difference. And I knew that your organization feels strongly about education as a way to break down some barriers or introduce new ways of thinking by teaching about history. And instead of doing a dance, which we could have done about facts, this date and so on and so forth, it's a way for our whole cast to be focused on the people and the impact of the witnesses by approaching it and sharing their story, sharing things that they remembered from their perspective. And so that's kind of an ongoing area of passion that I have, and it's a huge honor to be able to be here and be a part of this in honor of the Jewish community and the people who have gone before us and the witnesses that we're sharing with you.
Just as an artist and musician, a couple of things, but I mean, going in no specific order, Suzanne and I have worked together in the past, so when she invited me on this project, it was kind of a no-brainer on my part, because wonderful working with her on the Parkinson's piece that she set and all. But I think just being an artist and a musician, wanting to use my artistic and musical voice to share and to express and to add a dimension and element to people's lives, to affect them in different ways that hopefully you feel like you walk out after you've experienced something that I've been involved with, changed in some way, hopefully for the better, or that it's just something that can't help that it's, I think, part of us as artists. And so just any opportunity to do that in many situations, and accompanying dance is of special passion and love of mine that I've been involved with since school years, since I was a child. And so thinking back to when it was like in marching band, accompanying dance team, and then accompanying in dance studios and so many different situations, it's something that's it's the most special things that I get to do, is support the beautiful art that they create. And that's something that's very special to me. So.
Well, thank you both again so much. This was really beautiful, and to the cast as well. It just was a wonderful way to remember and to again put that emphasis back on the humanity and the individuals. So thanks to all of you, and thank you all for being here and remembering tonight.